We'll be chatting to Kevin Walsh in just a moment about Galway-Armagh. How are you feeling, Johnny, before we get to him about the confidence levels for this one? It feels very, very hard to find anybody who can give me a definitive answer to how this game is going to go.
Yeah, it looks very nicely poised. I think there's a belief in Galway. It'll be interesting to hear what Kevin says. I'm actually really fascinated to hear Kevin's views on it, because Galway have been in such a transition for the last number of years to get to a stage where they can fit into this modern, albeit evolving, game of Gaelic football. And I suspect that Kevin will have, as much as he's not the manager, will have taken great pride from the performances of the likes of Conroy and that. And the way that Galway are playing football is true to the old school of just beautiful kick passing, beautiful forwards. Will that be enough is the question. Do they have enough defensively and in terms of a game plan? And Galway do not have that much experience at Croke Park either, really. After 2001, had a horrendous run at Croke Park. Didn't win a game there, I think, for 16 years. And even in recent years, we've only had sporadic visits there, fairly tame against Mayo last year. So it's a hard one to call, I think.
Is it the last time Galway won at Croke Park? I think maybe against Kerry in 2018, the Super 8s clash.
I think so, yeah. It was 17 years. That was their first win. I'll always remember when 2001, when they beat Porrick Joyce, outscored Meath that day. And I always remember the paper the next day. Galway are on the cusp now. Galway are just going to dominate Gaelic football. They didn't win a game in Croke Park, as I think, for 16, 17 years. And I wonder if it comes down to the wire psychologically where they're at. They're not battle hardened like the likes of Mayo, but it's going to be some atmosphere there. The novelty of Clare being up there, Derry being up there, Armagh and Galway being in Croke Park, it's going to be a fantastic weekend of football.
Yeah, no, I really can't wait. There's been loads of reaction this morning. Ronan Hurricane has been in touch to say, does a lack of Super 8s affect Kerry's warm-up for bigger opposition? Pity we don't have the Super 8s this year. A group of Dublin, Mayo, Kerry and Cork, and Armagh, Galway, Derry, Clare will be class. Personally, I think Super 8's got a very, very hard time, and I think that one of the reasons why the Super 8's fell flat in its face was because Dublin were so dominant. So half of your groups were four.
Yeah.
So I actually think it got a little bit of a hard time personally. We're going to be going back to a group setup next year, and I think it'll be much better. Does it affect Kerry's warm-up for bigger opposition? That's an interesting question. I do think, though, that the last year, the Super 8s, 2019, Kerry's first game that year was against Mayo, and they hockeyed them. Now, it wasn't Killarney, so maybe that was the reason why, but Kerry have shown an ability to come straight from Munster to put in a big performance. Like, they scored the 7 goals, wasn't it, against Kildare that one time. They beat Galway well in 2017. On the flip side, obviously, they got caught by Galway in 2018, but I'm not sure I'm not sure that Kerry not being ready for bigger opposition as a result of Munster is an excuse at all. And
I don't know though. As a coach, what is there anything you can do to sort of make them that war ready against a Mayo team that it's so typical of Mayo that they've been able, they've now had, what are you talking, 3 hard games already. And that does stand to you, I think. It does. I think psychologically it does.
How come the Dubs managed to come through Leinster? To say that they were unscathed would suggest that somebody even tried to land a scratch on them over those six in a row and still managed to destroy teams routinely in the
I think their squad depth was so insane that you just had to be at it or you weren't
That's
playing.
what people are talking about with Kerry at the moment, that they have that level of squad depth where you have
Yet you're fretting hugely over Clifford.
They're fretting hugely over Clifford because he is an absolutely amazing player. If you want to lose a player in one position, I would say that corner forward position is the place where you want to lose a position, because for the season so far, Paul Ganey, Tony Brosnan and Killian Spillane have been competing for one spot in that forward line, who would get into a lot of other teams in the country, a lot of the other top teams in the country. So we'll come back to that in a while, but we do want to focus on the Galway-Armagh match, and delighted to say that Kevin Walsh is with us on the line now. Kevin, how are you getting on?
Morning, guys. How are you doing?
Very well. So we were just talking about that Croke Park element a few moments ago, and it's a really interesting storyline that's been spoken about for the majority of teams actually this weekend. How do you handle Croke Park when you get there? It's definitely a thing when it comes to the Derry footballers. It still feels that there's a bit of a hangover with the Galway drought between 2001 and 2018 in Croke Park, and maybe indeed for Galway's opponents, Armagh. So from your own experience, Kevin, how much does the game change when you get to Croke Park? How much of a factor is it in your preparation?
Look, I suppose it's a daunting enough area if you're not used to it, and I'd been long advocating that the Dubs should be taken out of it for certain big matches, and that's the reasons. And look at you, as I said before, you look at the bookies and the guys who are used to it. It's a big help, but for these two teams, I suppose Galway and Armagh, are fairly new to the occasion, so it should balance itself out, albeit 17, 18, 19, the Galway boys are probably more experienced than Armagh on that. But look, it's a totally, the pitch probably isn't that much bigger, really, to be honest, when you measure it, but it just plays bigger. And it's I suppose players getting their second wind and getting into the game is really, really important. So, look, it's a daunting, but it's a place every player wants to be. So, it suits certain players, it doesn't suit other players. But I suppose, they're two footballing teams, but it'll be interesting to see how space can be covered up, because it is a bit bigger.
That's the thing. Like Galway-Armagh, feels like it kind of has a life of its own. But with Derry this weekend, people are asking the question: can you implement their traditional Ulster style of football in Croke Park and make it all the way to winning Sam Maguire? Is that an unfair question to be asking, or is there challenges in implementing that sort of game plan in Croke Park?
I don't think the challenge is much different, to be honest. Like, when you measure up that field, it's not that amount bigger than anywhere else. So, if the game plan is well designed, which it does seem to be for Derry, you're always going to leave one or two up. Although I see some teams at the minute they're leaving nobody up, but you try and leave one or two up and make it for a quicker transition. But then if you've got pace and you got speed and you get your defence right, you can't hit any teams on the break. But look, again, we can overplay that. You have to be looking at what the value of the talent. At the end of the day, you're not going to send a Group 3 horse to win the Derby. So, like, it's a lot of, I suppose, a big weekend to show if players can stand up and if they're up to this or not. I suppose we don't know that with some of the teams involved.
You must be looking at the Irish Derby with Aidan O'Brien supplementing the filly there, Kevin, because he knew he'd only Group 3 horses, so he had to add her. Just before you came on, though, I'm very interested from a coach's perspective. If you're the Kerry manager, if you're Jack O'Connor, like, is there that concern? Like, how ready are we for war here, given our prep? Like, we haven't played for a proper game for 80 days. Like, is there anything you can do? And I know you can play challenges and so on, or is it just something you have to deal with?
Something you have to deal with, but I suppose they've had a lot of time to get themselves right. Look, again, Kerry, I haven't won All Ireland, but they're still well used to Croke Park and the big occasions, the big fields. They're well used to that. That's not going to be a problem. I suppose the question you're asking is to implement their own game, but look, they're going to be fresh as well. They're long enough playing together. This team is very similar to the team that we'd have played back in 2018. Paddy Clifford is probably new. They've lost, I suppose, Crowley. Dave Moran isn't playing as much as he used to be. James Dunno has gone since that, but they have the whole team, apart from Paddy Clifford. So I don't think that it's going to be a massive issue for Kerry, to be honest.
On the curtain raiser then on Sunday, this Galway-Armagh game, Kevin, as I'm sure you probably agree with, it's a very, very hard game to call. And when you try to dig down into what might edge it for either team, you start to look at matchups. If you just start with Galway first of all, and that Galway attack, I mean, these three lads from your time there very, very well, and Shane Walsh, Paul Conroy and Damien Comer. Is it still very much a case of if you stop those three lads, you've got a very, very good chance of stopping Galway, or have they moved beyond that point?
Yeah, look, this is the first real test to see that. And again, we don't even know how actually good Armagh are, because they actually didn't win Ulster. So, and Ulster at the minute, it doesn't seem to be as strong as it was. So it's hard to know. There's a lot of unanswered questions here. I suppose, Damien, Shane, they're 28, 29 now. Paul Conroy is in his 30s. There's no doubt they've been the big players so far. But, you look back at the Mayo squad, the first game, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Even Paddy Durcan was missing that day, who probably would have normally picked up Shane Walsh. So, have they got the heavy treatment yet? And by that I mean the close contact of players, and it's just really hard to know if the same space will be there. I don't expect the same space will be there as got there. Roscommon was the other test. Galway really deserved to win that game by more, but for the last year or two, I've said this in one of the last podcasts, I don't see the Roscommon bite there like it was a number of years ago. They have to find that, and again, that was one of the questions I asked before the Clare game: was that bite going to be there to get over the line? And it didn't seem it was again. So, it's hard to know. The test of the real close contact probably hasn't been there in the Connacht this year. So this is a real first test for Galway on that. The three lads up front, Shane Welch is obviously flying at the minute, so is Damien, so is Paul. But then again, Ulton Harney kicked 3 points in play against Galway, which is a concern. I think it was direct contact with Paul. So it's those things will have to be watched. It's not all about the attack. Croke Park is it is bigger than all pitches. So it's how are you going to make sure that you're okay on that side as well. So a lot of questions to be answered.
What do you make of Galway defensively, Kevin?
Look at it. I suppose Porrick's time, I suppose it took maybe 18 months or so to maybe fully realise that the defence has to be covered, and it took 1 or 2 heavy beatings as well. So, but again, that seemed to have gone back to where if that was, which is probably a good thing, because you just can't be shooting the lights out and talking about it. They're getting bodies back. I was down the Clare game. I did reckon that they were going to get bodies back for the Connacht Championship this year on the basis of what I saw on Clare and Tuam. I think they scored only 1-2 each at half time. So I expect Galway to be defensively. They seem to be pulling in the 2 wing backs in to cover. I'm not so sure that's the right thing in Croke Park. I think a +1 is enough in Croke Park, because you go 2 back like that, you're leaving your outside defensive line that a few yards short. So I'd be hoping maybe that we'll see a +1, a sweeper that can see ball at full times, and then we'll get the extra man pushed out into the defensive arc, because the gaps will appear in Croke Park if that arc isn't full. So look, it'll be interesting to see. It's not just about getting bodies back. It's about, knowing your full role in that system. So it'll be interesting to see that system or what they have in place, and to see can everybody cover off their own areas. Because, if you played Sean Kelly full back, which I presume they will, Sean Kelly, technically isn't a man marker as such. He'll need a bit of cover so he can do the real damage going forward. That's what I would expect. But again, the sweeper will need to know exactly what he's doing. And when you look through their Armagh forward line, Duffy's flying at the minute, Nugent is flying, ONeill is flying. Those gaps will have to be well protected.
For sure, and it brings us nicely on to the main man in Eoin ONeill. So the question for Galway, I presume, Kevin, is not just so much about how you try and quell his quality and his ability, but it's also about where he's going to play and the different pockets that he picks up. I assume that complicates matters a little bit for Pádraig Joyce.
Probably does, and again, it'll be down to, will Galway be zonal in defence, or will they be completely man-to-man, or will they go zonal and a +1 man-to-man on Eoin ONeill?
What would you do?
To be honest, I because of the class of what it looks like, the class of the 6 forwards, I'd be trying to get a bit of zonal done there, because I don't believe that just shooting out Eoin ONeill is going to stop the match. Duffy, as I said, is flying inside, so is Nugent. The lads on the outside line, Campbell, they're all going well.
Rugen,
what looks like going well. But again, the question is what intensity did Donegal bring to that? I mean, we played Donegal back in 2016-17 in Markville Park, and beat them by 16 points, where they just kind of have collapsed. So was that a little bit factor last week as well? I mean, the 2 kickouts were to the cornerbacks. They both dropped the ball, and which allowed Armagh push up. If those drops weren't given, would Armagh be winning in that game by so much? I'm not so sure. There's also periods there, I think, where Donegal won the first, maybe 20 minutes of the first half, where they would have won like 9-2 at one stage. So, it's just, I suppose, a load of unanswered questions on 2 younger teams.
The point you made earlier about Paul Conroy is really interesting, because obviously he's been getting a load of praise for his attacking exploits, but going the other way, it sounds like you think that there's an ability to ask a question of him. So, like Armagh against Donegal anyway, with Stephen Sheridan and Ben Creeley in midfield. So you'd imagine one of those might be picking up Paul Conroy. But is there a shout to potentially put Jarly Og in that position, just given what he can do to Paul Conroy going the other way?
Yeah, look, again, I mean, that's the beauty, I suppose, having the likes of Jarly Og, who can play. He is playing really well, wing back and coming off the shoulder as well. So I'm not so sure they'll move him, to be honest. I think they'll probably stay with what they are. I suppose Paul Conroy's been finding pockets, and we all know he's a very good kicker and shooter. But like I said, the other way is just as important. And even going back to Roscommon goal in the league final, there was 5 or 6 Galway lads there, including Paul Conroy, who was probably the closest, and just allowed him walk by him. So those little things really need to be tightened up. You're coming to quarterfinal now, you're coming to better teams. Those things will find you out. And the old saying, defence wins championships and attack sells tickets. That needs to be looked at as well, in particular for Galway. But in fairness, the last year or so, Galway are getting the bodies back, but it's in relation to Croke Park now, what can they do up against the better teams? And like either Armagh or Galway, they really have the nice side of the draw at the minute. So I suppose there's a huge carrot here for the teams, and I suppose it's important that you don't like the boxers do. You don't go out and try and win the first round and leave yourself completely open. I mean, just need a cool head and have a look at the opportunity that's there in front of us and go at it in a controlled manner, I suppose.
Are they scarred by Mayo last year in the sense, and you mentioned Paul Conroy, who, like, Paul was very good in the first half, and a bit like the rest of the Galway team, they basically just fell apart in the second half. They were completely battered by Mayo. Is that niggling in the back of your mind, Kevin?
Look, I suppose I've always said that, you treat the two imposters the same way, the winning and losing. So you break the game down. You treat the first half and the second half the same way, and look at what happened. It's not just as simple as you were brilliant the first half and you fell off the second half. Things can go against you, things can go with you. A ball can come off the post, you may be looking for the rebound and put it in the back of the net, or you might be unlucky not to get the rebound. So all the little things have to be taken into account. So it's not just as simple that you fall away. I would say probably in the last 10 or 15 minutes that when the game is still there for you and you see a body language where the head goes down or two or three people start tracking or there's a kind of a token tackle, that kind of tells you where you might be giving in. Where, to be fair to people, it's not all about just a very bad first half, second half. You need to break them two down. So I don't think that'll scare them. I just think that they'll see an opportunity that it's a new team like Armagh, and I suppose if you look at the country at the minute, Armagh and Derry are probably the two teams that we'll say have improved. You look at the pretenders to Kerry and Dublin, I'd have to say that they've gone backwards. They've like Tyrone, Monaghan, Mayo. The teams that are up closer there seem to be going backwards, which means the pack is open behind Kerry and Dublin a minute.
Yeah, just one last question about Galway-Armagh that I had was just the specific on who marks Shane Walsh. What's the best matchup from Armagh's perspective on that?
Again, it's I suppose that's kind of hard to know, but I suppose probably one of their tightest markers would be Morgan, and he's a tough defender. He's no nonsense. He's mentally very strong. He does get a few bookings. Is he the guy maybe that will take up Shane Walsh? Maybe he is, because he's like a guy that doesn't his mind doesn't go wandering for 5 or 10 seconds. He's like a guy that's focused on his task, and it'll be someone that is totally focused on the task to stay with Shane and take him down the alleyways that probably will suit the opposing teams. But look at Shane is on top of his game at the minute. But again, has that space been open for him, and will he be tested on the other side of it? Probably will start to get tested now as we come to quarterfinals. So, as I said, some of the bigger players might have been missing on the Mayo side that might have challenged that. Like Boyle obviously has gone now. Durkin was missing that one. Keith Higgins is gone. Parsons has got that middle area, wouldn't be as strong in Mayo. So I'm not so sure how much they've been tested yet. So look, I'm really looking forward to this one. But probably Morgan might be given that task maybe.
In terms of Galway's evolution kind of in the last 10 years since, I suppose, the Jim McGuinness era, really, like, how did you find that, Kevin, as somebody, and maybe it's a lazy thing to say, Galway, the football purists, always remember you as a player in that era of Gaelic football. How did you find that transition? Because it never looked easy for Galway. And like when you had what was considered a defensive system in an era where everyone had to play that way, how hard was that to inculcate in a Galway DNA that just didn't seem to have it?
I'd say, to be honest, it's probably difficult for every single team unless you're brought that way up through an underage system and where you're given all the tools. And I suppose that's where teams are going to improve in the future, is what county boards now are I suppose, putting in their development camps in to give all the tools to all the players, so that when they come to 1920 that they're able to step into whatever is required. And that's something that's been short and missed in most counties. And I suppose that is the evolution that's going to come forward now. Is because if you're going to have any chance, you need to get in there early. But it's a very difficult thing to do to, I suppose, teach old dogs new tricks, and that is very, very difficult to do. It takes a long, long time. It takes an awful lot of perseverance, and it takes an awful lot of I suppose, coaching as well and understanding. So it does take a long time. But I suppose all you can do is is measure as you go along, set targets for the team so that they can see and give them feedback that they are improving. Because if you look at everything that it takes so many weeks and months to develop a new skill, and unfortunately when you think you're not developing, the first while of that being done, people can get frustrated and they don't see the improvement. So there's a thing called, like, if you ever look at the habit curve, it'll show that first 6 weeks of any skill, you mightn't see much improvement at all. It's the next 4 that you'll see stepping up. So it takes an awful lot of time, it takes an awful lot of belief, and it takes buy-in from the players. And the only way you get that is to measure and show improvements. And if you don't do that, and you can't do that yourself as a coach, you'll probably lose them along the way. But look, it is difficult, but it's essential. That's where things are gone at the minute. And even, I suppose, even Galway proved that over the last number of years, where it just can't be a shootout and out you go and talk about tradition. And in fairness, if you're a Galway person, and without being too strong on this, we had a good enough era after having a bad era, and we're lucky enough to be there in 98, 2001, and maybe left 1 or 2 behind us. But at the same time, you take out that little section from 1966 to now, that's the section that was competing. So all we needed to change and do something different.
It's really interesting what you talk about there, like in terms of trying to teach an old dog new tricks. Like, one of the men you had with you in that era during your Galway managerial stint was Paddy Tally, and he managed to instill a really good game plan defensively for Galway at the time, or he managed to help you along that. Like, can he teach those old Kerry dogs, some young Kerry dogs, new tricks this year? Have you seen enough from what he's done in Kerry this year to suggest that they've made that step forward themselves? I'm just interested in your insights on Tally.
Yeah, I look at the fair because as you said earlier on, they just haven't been tested properly. I'm not sure yet where that's gone to, and I'm really looking forward to it from quarterfinal stage on for Kerry, including against Mayo, because Mayo will test that. But it'll be really interesting to see. Like, I suppose Paddy came into us. He came in after St. Mary's had been out, so it was late January when he came in. So technically only a few months. I'm sure he'll bring some of that with him, and I'm sure he'll be trying a lot of that. But because in fairness, Kerry would have always been marking beside or right behind or tight, and always had the ability to hold up. But look, in defence, it's always you should delay, deny, and then defend. But Kerry were always defending first. So hopefully that, from Kerry's point of view, that Paddy will be shown how to play in front and that type of stuff, for Kerry are missing the pass. So, but again, I haven't seen that yet. But hopefully this championship is going to show us that now.
Who's winning Galway-Armagh?
Geez, lads, it's awful hard to call. Like, honestly, like it's really hard to call. And if you break down their Armagh forwards, they all look really good talents coming forward. But then you go on to the Galway forwards, and you have Shane Walsh and, as you said, Damien Comer. Rob Finnerty's kicking pints for fun when he gets space. Will that space be afforded? Not so sure. And then I suppose this is the supporting cast strong enough to those 3 or 4. That'll be told again. It's really difficult to call, lads. I'd be only shooting, I guess, at it, and I suppose that's why the bookie hasn't needed money. But it'll be interesting to see what type of defence is deployed in Croke Park. It's a little bit more difficult. But look, I'll have to go from my own county in this one and hope to get off the line by 1 or 2.
All right, Kevin, enjoy it on Sunday. Thanks a million for taking the call.
No problem, guys.
Kevin Walsh, former Galway manager and of course All-Ireland winner with Galway as well during his playing days on the line.